First thing I have to do is say, "Hello, Sarah Baker." She called me yesterday and left a message and told me that she wouldn't be here, and I still look around and see that there's others not here, so we want to say hi to all of them and welcome them into the assembly. I have to tell you this, all of my life preaching, give me about a year and I can tell where everybody in the congregation sits, and I can check attendance in my mind by that. And as I'm here 14 years after I was here, well, I was here one time before, but 14 years since I was here as a full-time minister, you're still sitting where you used to sit. Man, I'd hate to have somebody ask you to move. We might have a disfellowshipping time if we did that. I had a 75th birthday on July the 27th, and the day before, my gift was an artificial knee. So on my 75th birthday, I was in the hospital and not enjoying it. If anybody asks you about it, the knee is the worst joint to replace. That's what my doctor told me. Anybody in here had knee replacement? Welcome to the club. And the doctor told me, he said, these things happened in the second half of life. And I said, thank you for telling me I'm getting older. Okay, enough of that. It is good to see so many of you here. I'm King Walker over there. I hadn't seen King in forever. Have any of you been having a hard time being grateful lately? Being thankful? What are the reasons why you might not be thankful? COVID, 2 years of COVID, and still more to come. Masks, not masks. Politics, red and blue and purple. Illness, surgeries, death, inflation. Any others you want to add to the list to not be really grateful for? It's been a tough 2 years. But then I remember there are other things to be grateful for. One of the things I remember is right back over here when the church office was over here. I was doing premarital counseling with Rebecca Humphrey and her soon-to-be husband, whose name I cannot remember. And I remember asking them what were their goals in life and try to get some sense of who they were as people. And I asked them, what is your goal in life? And Rebecca said to me, quote, my goal in life is to make God look good to other people. And I sat there and was stunned. She had it nailed. Life's purpose is to make God look good to other people. And I was so grateful for that. In another congregation, we were having a hot dog supper. And we heard a little girl say, can we come here every Sunday? Gratitude. We used to have the habit of periodically we'd get those big jumpers for children to get on. You know, the big blow-up things, and they'd bounce around and all over them. One of the guys setting it up asked our youth minister, who pays for this? He said, our members do. They contribute to it. And he was stunned. He said, most of the churches that we set these things up for are only for their people. It is so good to see you meeting the needs of the community. Something to be grateful for. We're going through a time when it's hard to be grateful. But then you run on to this verse that was read to us a while ago at the end of that section that says in 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 18, give thanks in all circumstances. American Standard Version says, in everything give thanks. Lord, isn't that a bit tough to ask us to do that? To give thanks in everything? See, one of the problems is we have created a world in which God is the great Santa Claus and He gives us what we want. And people quote those verses that says God is for you and God wants you to prosper and God wants this for you and God wants that for you. The other problem is, what if God doesn't want it for us? What if there's another way to approach it? In everything, give thanks. How do you do that? One of the most important characters, in fact, in my mind, the most important character in the Bible outside of Jesus is Joseph, in terms of the example that he sets for us and what he offers us. Joseph grew up in a dysfunctional family. 2 moms and 2 handmaids, 4 women having kids. One of those was Joseph. He was Dad's favorite. It's a disaster to make one of your children a favorite. It does them no service. Joseph is made the favorite. He thinks more highly of himself than he ought. He has those dreams, and he tells his brother about those dreams, that they're all going to be bowing down to him. That's not designed to make good relationships in a family. So they sold him. That was bad. No, it was good. He was sold into Potiphar's house, where he became the master of everything in the house. And that was wonderful. Except Potiphar's wife accused him of sexual assault. That was bad. They threw him into prison. That was bad. No, that was good. Because while he was in prison, he came basically, if you know military terms, and I'm not sure I do have this correctly, he became the master sergeant of the prison. He was the top dog next to the warden himself. That's how much God was blessing him in that opportunity to influence and be beneficial to other prisoners. 2 men were thrown into prison one day. The baker and the cupbearer to Pharaoh. They had dreams. Joseph interpreted them. One was bad and one was good. One was going to be executed and the one was going to be restored to his place before Pharaoh. But he forgot Joseph. That was bad. But notice the timing. Joseph is in prison where they can find him when Pharaoh has his dreams. And Pharaoh's servant remembered Joseph. That's good. Joseph is brought into Pharaoh's presence. And Joseph tells what the dreams mean: 7 years of plenty and 7 years of want. Joseph becomes second only to Pharaoh. In fact, one of the terms given to him is father of Pharaoh. That's how important his position was in the land. Because of him, their 7 years of plenty became the security for the 7 years of famine. Meanwhile, down back home, Joseph's family were starving because a famine hit the land. That was bad. Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to get some food. That was good. When they get there, they discover that their brother, who they sold into slavery, is now second only to Pharaoh. That's bad. They assume that Joseph is going to treat them as they had treated him. But in the midst of that process, Joseph said in Genesis chapter 45, verse 5, "And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Do you see that train of that's bad and that's good and that's bad and that's good at the end of the story? That's good. What's going on in that process? For us to allow God to work in our lives that way, we have to recognize that we must be thankful, whatever the circumstance is, because God's got something waiting for us on the other side. Joseph Shulam, Jewish preacher in Israel, grew up in Israel. When he became a Christian, his family had a funeral for him. And when he went back to Israel to preach the gospel, one day they opened up the door and threw a gunny sack full of rats into their house. Persecution deluxe. He said the American perspective is there's always light at the end of the tunnel. He said the Jewish perspective is there's always darkness at the end of the tunnel and then light. That's the process that Joseph went through. Every time he came to a place, there was darkness. And there would be darkness, and then there would be light. And then there would be darkness, and then there would be light. Do you remember what Job said when God turned Satan loose on him? Job was the richest man in the place. He was the wisest man in the place. He had everything going for him. He even interceded for his children in case they sinned in their parties. And he would offer sacrifices on their behalf. Best man that ever lived. But then Satan was turned loose. God took the leash off of Satan, except he couldn't touch Satan's body. He couldn't touch Job's body. His wife comes to him, and there was a time, I think, when he may have wished God had taken his wife. Because his wife said, "Why don't you just condemn God and die?" You remember what Job said in response? "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." How do you do that? Job has the part that we love down very well. The Lord has given. We love that part. We love that every good and perfect gift comes from God, as James says. But the other part that we overlook is, Job says, and God has taken it away. There are several times through the prophets in the Old Testament where they're describing that God gives and God takes away. We don't often get that part. One of the things I've noticed about getting older is God takes some things away. It's not much fun. Anybody agree with me on that? Anybody's listening to me on that? God took away. And there goes through that process in which his friends are trying to convince him that he's the bad guy and he's the cause of it. And if he would repent and get his act together, God would bless him again. And God comes to them and said, "You friends are all wrong." And he says to Job, "You were more right than they were, but you got it wrong too." And when you come to the end of the book of Job, my translation is, God says to Job, "You're going to have to trust me on this," because God does not give Job the answers. And that's where we are in our lives. We have things happening to us, and if we understand God, we understand that He takes it away. Now here's where the struggle comes. There's a big long word, and it's the word sovereignty. When we come to God, His sovereignty is what's challenging to us. I knew a man in Los Angeles. His name was Jack Hayford. Jack Hayford had the church on the way. It started out with 200 people and it grew to 10,000 people. He had two facilities, one on both sides of the Van Nuys Church of Christ where I was preaching at that time. He describes in his book that one day in the chapel where he first started, when there were 200 people attending, a small building, that he went in that building and the building was filled with mist, smoke, whatever. And God talked to him. One problem, when you read the Bible, what do people do when they approach divinity? When they come into God's presence? They hit the dirt. They're on their knees. What did Peter say when they pulled in that huge load of fish that Jesus had provided? "Go away, for I'm a sinful man." The sovereignty of God demands that we bow down before Him and do whatever He says to do and take whatever He gives us, whether it's good or whether it's bad. He does take away. It's the concept of being a parent. In the letter to the Hebrews, they describe, your suffering is not to the point of death. And when I read that, I think, phew, I'm glad to know that. But they're suffering all the way to the point of death. And the writer says, get over it. You're God's children. And He's demonstrating that to you by disciplining you, by taking it away, by giving it up. And every time God takes something away, He always comes back with something better. The children of Israel go into Babylonian captivity, and they come out. And you know what? They were guilty of idolatry, which sent them into Babylonian captivity, but they were never guilty of idolatry again in their history. Other problems, as we have, spiritually, understanding God's will, but idolatry was burned out of them in Babylon. He took away their freedom to get their attention, to get them to pay closer relationship to Him. And here's where the rubber meets the road. It is hard to trust the sovereignty of God because it can get very uncomfortable. Whether it's persecution, whether it's illness, whether it's I don't like it, or any other fill in the blanks. The sovereignty of God means we must bow down before Him and thank Him for everything. And if we don't understand the sovereignty of God, that ability to be grateful in all circumstances will go away. It will not be there. Because you can't trust God if you cannot be thankful in everything. Let me tell you a story. It's comparable to Joseph's story, except it's my story. I grew up in a dysfunctional family. There were some therapists who described the four of us children as having endured post-traumatic stress disorder because of the abuse we had growing up. That was bad. Because of that, I had to find a way to get good attention. In the 7th grade, I started giving talks at youth groups. I learned quickly that by giving talks, I could get a good attention. And I learned over time that I never did get attacked in the pulpit. Now, once I came out of the pulpit, that was a different story. I was very much aware of the smell of fried chicken, fried preacher, that some would have on Sunday afternoons. We had been in St. Louis for 12 years, loved it. The Lord decided to move us. I wasn't thrilled with that. He opened up a door in Los Angeles. I sure didn't like that. In fact, when we left for the first interview, Ann bought a Disneyland sweatshirt at the airport because she said, we're never coming back. But we did. Because that's what the Lord said. And I argued with Him. And I really was arguing with Him when I was in my Mazda pickup, extended cab, so I could put everything I had to provide for the next 4 months before Ann and the girls moved out to California. And driving west, I was miserable. That was bad. Got to Los Angeles to the church where I was going to be working. I had to step over a homeless guy laying in the doorway. Had to unlock the door to get in, and once I was in, I had to have all the doors inside the building locked. And the mailbox on the front of the church building had a padlock on it. When I looked out the window of my office there, beneath the office was a row of bushes, and a homeless guy had built a nest under there for him to sleep. That wasn't good. I was so lonesome and so sad and didn't like it. That was all bad. A couple of years after I was there, I got sick with chronic fatigue syndrome and was sick for 3 years. In the early part of that, I went to the office and I could work for 30 minutes and lay down on the cot for 2 hours. That wasn't thrilling. Not long during that process, we had the Rodney King riots. Our streets were filled with smoke from burning buildings and National Guard people patrolling the streets with big guns. We had to have a funeral with special permission because there was a quarantine on being out. And then not long after that, the Northridge earthquake hit. That was bad. Terrifying. Worst thing I've ever been through. But then it was good. God let the Churches of Christ send over $1 million to us to be distributed for earthquake relief. That was good. The elders appointed me to the task of distributing that money. You cannot believe how fun it is to give away $1 million over a year's time. That was wonderful. I had gotten a certificate in dispute resolution from Pepperdine University School of Law. They didn't have the master's degree program going yet. During that year, I was doing earthquake relief work. They were putting together that master's degree program so that when I had it all done, I could work on my master's degree. That was wonderful. On top of that, Ann worked there, so we got 50% discount. And on top of that, my parents learned of me wanting to do that, and they said, would you mind if we paid the other half? Now, you'd have to understand the background of that because they had done a whole lot of presumings and buying things for me that created an issue. I said, sure. So they paid for me, and the school paid for me to get my master's degree in dispute resolution. Left there and went to Bakersfield. Went to Bakersfield and got caught up in office politics at the church building. We were back to visit later, and that was bad. We were back to visit later, and one of the elders saw us in the auditorium, and when he finished making announcements, he walked down the aisle with tears in his eyes and hugged us and apologized for what had happened. That was good. We moved from there to here. God delivered me here from an addiction. He let us go to Odessa. That was bad. Anybody been to Odessa, Texas? Ann grew up there, and I lived in that neighborhood, and that was not a terrific place to be, except her parents were there. Her mom had had lung cancer for 17 years. Her dad was taking care of her. Ann got to spend about 1.5 years with her mom. We'd always lived 900 miles away from them. That was good. During that process, preaching for the church in Odessa, rumors and gossip got around, and I got fired. The church rose up. Those 3 elders resigned and went to another church, and I was rehired a week later. That was good. Had no elders through the summer. They got really nervous, so they appointed elders in 4 days. And they decided they wanted to make a change and go in a different direction. For me, that was bad. It was also bad for them because they're now down to 25 people. In the congregation was a woman named Dr. Susan Laura. She was the dean. She was the vice president of student services at the University of Texas of the Permian Basin. She said, would you like to come work for me for 4 months and catch up on discipline issues? I said, I'd love it. Worked for the university for 4 months. But I still had to find something to do, so I went to school to learn how to drive a big rig, those big 18-wheelers. I could park one of those things at a designated spot within 18 inches of the curb. That's one of my proudest achievements of my life. But then I learned having a CDL license meant nothing if you don't have experience. And you can't get experience except driving for fly-by-night operations that's going to put all these dings on your record. So I didn't find a job. Finally, I did. But it wasn't going to start yet. So I went to work for Office Depot. I was a 65-year-old stock boy, carrying cartons of reams of paper up the stairs to put them on the top shelf for storage. I would come home hurting so badly I wouldn't even eat lunch. Work from 6 to 12. During that process, I got a call to drive a truck hauling water. But I quickly realized that wasn't my favorite job. I was waiting for the university to open up the position of Associate Dean of Students. And they did. And that was good. Now, to bring this story to a conclusion, You know why I got that job at the University of Texas of the Permian Basin, besides the influence of the vice president? I'd gotten that master's degree back in Los Angeles in a place that I did not like. But out of the bad came the good. And today, because I worked for the time I worked there, we're partially living on the pension from the University of Texas system. It was bad, it was good, it was bad, it was good, it was bad, 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 then it was good, good, good. That's when you bow down before the sovereignty of God. When you back up and realize the truthfulness of what Job said when he said, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And the only one who has submitted to God and who bows down before Him understands that and is willing to accept it. That's why we can give thanks in all circumstances, because we don't know what God's going to do. What we think is bad could be very good. I have this dream of dying and going to heaven. Looking forward to it. But my wife and kids aren't too thrilled with me having that idea. So I stay and endure getting older and parts replaced, just like all of you are. Well, some of you. We got a bunch of young folks in here now. That's a part of the process. What's the alternative to getting older? Dying. What's the result of dying? For the Christian, going to heaven. Why would I want to stay here with a bum artificial knee when I can be with the Lord? A wife and 2 kids and friends who don't want me to leave yet. But that's in God's hands. That's when we bow down before the sovereignty of God. We understand that He is Lord. He's the one in charge of our lives. And oh, by the way, I learned during that process, He knows more about it than I do. Amen. Half of that stuff I went through, I didn't like it, didn't enjoy it, upset, depressed, overwhelmed. When are you going to get me out of this, the Lord? See, I always have the belief that God's going to get me out of it. He's just not doing it on the timetable that I want. Come on, Lord, let's get the move on here. I don't want to keep waiting forever. And God said, you're not going to wait forever. You're just going to wait on me. So here's the challenge that I give to us. No matter what our circumstances and no matter where we are in life, and no matter what we're dealing with, give thanks in everything. Because God is sovereign. God is Lord. Oh, the rest of the story? I'm back in this auditorium preaching 14 years later. And at the Northwest Church where we regularly attend, I'm preaching 3 Sundays a month because we're looking for a preacher too. And the elders asked me to fill in. I said, okay, I'll do that. I'm getting to preach again because the Lord is sovereign. Because the Lord knows what He's doing. Do you believe in the sovereignty of God? Have you submitted your life to Him to where in spirit, if not literally, you hit the dirt when you're in His presence? That you recognize that He is Yahweh. He is the Lord of heaven and earth. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. If you're struggling with that, we want to help you. All of us in here are struggling with one thing or another. So often we come to church with our Sunday. Well, in the olden days, we'd come to church in our Sunday morning clothes. Chris is the only one who does it now. I've preached in blue jeans now. Or black jeans. Times have changed. But do we still honor the Lord? If you need to share a need with this body, please share that as we stand and sing.